Victoria Ashford smashed her champagne glass against the marble floor and cut straight through 300 guests, her heels striking the stone like gunfire until her hand locked around a stranger's wrist. "Take it off," she said. "Take that necklace off, right now." The Navy officer didn't pull away. Against his chest hung a small silver anchor, the same one she had buried in her heart with her husband 10 years ago. But Nathaniel Ashford had died alone in a rescue off the coast. His body was never even recovered whole. So how was his necklace rising and falling on the chest of a man she had never met in her life? Comment below. And tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe in loyalty and second chances, and in the kind of courage that outlives a man, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel and stay with me all the way to the end. Because what this Navy father is about to say will change everything Victoria thought she knew about the night her husband died. The invitation had called it an evening for the fallen. Victoria Ashford had signed the check that paid for the entire thing, and she still hadn't wanted to come. She'd built Ashford Global from a 2-room office into a company with her name on towers in 9 cities, and somewhere in those 10 years, she had learned how to walk into a room full of people who wanted something from her and give them nothing but a smile. She was good at it. She was the best at it. Her people said she could freeze a boardroom with a single raised eyebrow. But charity galas were different. Charity galas were full of widows. "You don't have to stay long," her assistant Diane had murmured on the drive over. "Say a few words, shake a few hands. We can have you home by 9. "I know how it works, Diane. I'm just saying you look tired." "I always look tired. It's called being 52. Diane had let it go. She was smart enough to know that when Victoria's voice got flat like that, the conversation was over. Now, Victoria stood near the tall windows with a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking, nodding at a senator's wife, who was explaining at great length why her foundation was doing more good than anyone else's foundation. Victoria wasn't listening. She had learned to make her face do the listening while the rest of her went somewhere else. Tonight, somewhere else was a beach house they'd owned 20 years ago. Before the money, before the towers, when Nathaniel used to burn the eggs every single Sunday and swear that this time he'd gotten it right. She could still hear him laughing about it. That was the cruel part. 10 years gone, and she could still hear the exact pitch of his laugh. "Mrs. Ashford," the senator's wife said. "You've gone somewhere." "Forgive me," Victoria said, and pulled her smile back on like a coat. "It's a long week. You were saying—" That was the moment she saw it. Across the ballroom near the doors, a man in a navy dress uniform bent down to say something to a little girl. The girl had both her hands wrapped around one of his, the way children do when a room is too big and too loud, and the only safe thing in it is a parent's hand. The man's uniform was pressed and clean, but wrong somehow. Victoria's eye, trained by 30 years of noticing details in negotiations, caught it immediately. The cuffs had been repaired. The fabric had been let out and taken in more than once. It was a uniform a man kept because he could not afford to replace it, worn by a man too proud to let anyone see that. She noticed all of that in half a second, and then she noticed the necklace. It hung outside his collar, where it shouldn't have been, catching the light, a small silver anchor on a worn chain. And Victoria Ashford, who had not lost her composure in a public room in 10 years, felt the entire ballroom tilt. She knew that necklace. She knew the exact curve of that anchor. She knew there was a scratch near the lower edge, because Nathaniel had dropped it on the tile the morning she gave it to him, and she had cried, and he had laughed, and told her the scratch made it theirs. She knew the clasp stuck if you pulled it the wrong way. She had fastened that clasp around her husband's neck on their 5th wedding anniversary, and she had never seen it again because the last time Nathaniel wore it, he wore it into a storm off the coast and never came back. The glass slipped out of her hand. It hit the marble and burst. Champagne sprayed across her shoes and the hem of a $10,000 gown, and heads turned all across the ballroom, and Victoria didn't notice a single one of them. She was already moving. "Victoria," Diane's voice somewhere behind her. "Victoria, are you?" She didn't answer. She was walking. Then she was walking faster, her heels cracking against the marble guests, parting in front of her, because a woman with that look on her face makes people step back on instinct. Someone said her name. Someone reached for her arm, and she pulled free without even seeing who it was. The Navy officer looked up when the room went quiet around him. He straightened, his daughter pressed against his leg. Victoria reached him, and her hand shot out and closed around his wrist. "Take it off," she said. Her voice came out low and shaking, nothing like the voice that ran board meetings. "Take that necklace off, right now." The man didn't flinch. That was the first thing that stopped her. He didn't flinch. A stranger grabs your arm in a crowded room and shouts in your face, and every instinct says, pull back, defend, deny. He did none of it. He just looked at her steady, the way a man looks who has been in rooms far more dangerous than this one. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I don't understand." "That necklace." Her finger was pointing at his chest now, and her hand was trembling so hard she could see it, and she couldn't stop it. "Where did you get that necklace? Where did you get it?" The little girl started to cry. That did it. That broke through the roaring in Victoria's ears. She looked down and saw a child maybe 7 years old, staring up at her, with a small face gone white with fear, and Victoria felt something inside her go cold with shame. The man crouched instantly, all his attention gone from Victoria to the girl. Hey, Avery, look at me. Look at me, sweetheart. You're okay, nothing's wrong. This nice lady just wants to ask me a question, that's all." "Okay." His voice had dropped into something soft and even. A voice with years of practice in it, a voice built for exactly this. "I've got you. I always got you. Right?" The girl nodded, sniffling. "Good girl. You want to stand behind me for a minute? You can hold on to my belt, like on the base." The girl moved behind him and grabbed a fistful of his uniform belt, and only then did the man stand back up and face Victoria again. And now there was something new in his eyes, not anger exactly, but a warning. A father's warning. "Whatever this is, you don't do it in front of my daughter." "Ma'am," he said, still quiet, "I don't know who you are, but I think you've made a mistake." "There's no mistake." Victoria heard her own voice cracking and hated it. "That anchor, there's a scratch on the bottom edge. Isn't there? A little scratch, right?" Her finger hovered near the pendant without touching it. "Right there." The man's face changed. It was subtle. Anyone else would have missed it. But Victoria had spent 3 decades reading the faces of men across tables, watching for the exact flicker of the moment they realized they'd lost control of a room. She saw it now. She saw the certainty go out of him. "How do you know that?" he said. It wasn't a question anymore. "Because I put it there." Her breath was coming short. "I mean, he did. He dropped it. The morning I gave it to him. I gave that necklace to my husband 20 years ago, and he died wearing it 10 years ago, and I have not seen it since, and it is around your neck. So I am going to ask you one more time, and I need you to tell me the truth." She had to stop. She had to breathe. "Where did you get it?" For a long moment, the man said nothing. The ballroom had gone dead silent around them. Somewhere, a string quartet had stopped playing. 300 people were pretending not to watch, and every one of them was watching. And then something in the officer's shoulders came down. Just an inch. The way a man's shoulders come down when he's carried something for a long time and has just realized he's finally going to have to set it down. "Not here," he said. "What? Not in front of my daughter, and not in front of all these people." He glanced around the room once, and Victoria saw him take in the crowd, the cameras, the whole gilded weight of it. "You want the truth. I'll give you the truth. I've wanted to give it to somebody for 12 years, but not like this." Victoria's whole body wanted to grab him and shake it out of him right there. But something in the way he said it, 12 years, held her still. "There's a room," she heard herself say. "Off the main hall. It's quiet." "Then let's go to the room." He looked down at his daughter. "Avery, I need you to be brave for me for a few minutes, okay? This lady and I are going to talk. You remember Miss Diane's rule about being brave?" The girl nodded solemnly. Brave means scared, but doing it anyway. Something moved across Victoria's chest, sharp and unexpected. That was Nathaniel's line. That was exactly, word for word, a thing Nathaniel used to say. She hadn't told anyone that. She had never told a living soul that. "Where?" she said, and her voice was barely a whisper now. "Did you hear that? That thing she just said? Being brave means scared, but doing it anyway. Where did you hear it? The man looked at her, and for the first time the hardness in him gave way to something else. Something almost like grief. From a man in a storm, he said. The last night of his life. The room off the main hall had a long table and a wall of dark windows and none of the noise. Diane hovered at the door with a little girl having somehow, in the wordless way of assistants, who have been through 100 crises, understood that her job right now was to keep a 7-year-old occupied. She'd produced a phone with a cartoon on it and a promise of chocolate cake, and Avery had gone with her, but only after her father crouched down one more time and told her he'd be right through that door and not going anywhere. Then it was just the two of them. Victoria stood on one side of the table, the officer stood on the other, and for a moment, neither of them knew how to start. "I don't even know your name," she said finally. "Dawson. Commander Caleb Dawson, United States Navy." He said it the way military men say their names, clean and complete, the whole identity, in 3 pieces. "And you're Victoria Ashford, I know that much. Everybody here knows that much. It's your name on the banner outside." "Yes, I almost didn't come tonight." A short, tired breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "This isn't my kind of room, but it was for military families, and my chaplain got me a ticket, and I thought Avery ought to see that people remember, that folks like her mom aren't forgotten." He stopped. "I didn't know whose gala it was. I want you to understand that. I didn't come here to find you. I didn't know there was a you to find. Then explain it to me." Victoria pressed her palms flat against the cold surface of the table to keep them from shaking. "Because I have spent 10 years believing that necklace was at the bottom of the ocean. I built a life on top of that grief, Commander. I know exactly where every piece of that night is, because I have gone over it 10,000 times. My husband took a helicopter out in a storm to help with a rescue, and the helicopter went down, and they never even found all of—" Her voice failed. She made it start again. "So I need you to tell me how you have his necklace. And I need you to do it slowly, and I need you to do it true, because I have been lied to by clever people for 10 years, and I will know." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out a chair slow, and sat down and gestured for her to do the same. She didn't. So he started anyway, looking not at her, but at his own hands folded on the table. 12 years ago, he said. Before I made commander before Avery. Before I lost my wife, I was younger, and I thought I was tougher than I was. I was stationed on the coast doing search and rescue. It's a strange job. You spend most of your days waiting, and then 20 minutes deciding whether some stranger lives or dies. He turned the words over carefully, like he'd never said them out loud. There was a storm that came in fast that night, worse than the forecast. And there was an accident up on the cliff road, you know, the stretch, the one that hangs out over the water. Victoria did know it. Everyone who'd lost someone on that coast knew it. A car went off the shoulder and hit the guardrail and pinned itself against the rock, and there was a family in it, and the road was washing out under everybody's feet. Emergency crews were coming, but the storm had the whole coast tied up. And there was this civilian. He shook his head slowly. This one guy who didn't wait. Everybody else stood back because standing back was the smart thing, the trained thing, and this one man in a soaked-through jacket just went. Climbed down toward that car in the dark, and the rain like it was nothing, like it never even occurred to him not to. Victoria's hand had come up to cover her mouth. "I thought he was going to get himself killed," Caleb said. "I remember thinking whoever that idiot is, he's going to die tonight, and I'm going to have to be the one who tells his family. So I went after him. Because that's the job. You go after the idiots." A ghost of something crossed his face. "And we got down there together, and we got that back door open, and we started pulling people out. Kids first. He was passing them up to me one at a time, and every time he did, he'd say the same thing to them. This little thing to keep them from panicking. He'd say, 'Being brave means scared, but doing it anyway,'" Victoria whispered. Caleb looked up at her. "You've heard it." "I heard it for 20 years. Tears were running freely down her face now, and she wasn't wiping them away. "It's what he used to say to me, before every hard thing, before the company nearly went under, before everything. He'd take my face in his hands and he'd say it." Her voice broke completely. "Keep going." Caleb waited until she nodded that she could hear the rest. "We got everybody out," he said. "Every single one. 2 adults, 3 kids, all of them out and up the slope and into the arms of the crew that finally made it. And I remember thinking we did it. This crazy stranger and me, we actually did it. Nobody died tonight. He stopped. His jaw worked. And then the road went. The room was so silent. Victoria could hear the ballroom's faint music leaking through the walls. The whole shelf of it just came down, rock and asphalt and the guardrail and everything. And I was on the wrong side of it. I was too close to the edge, and it took the ground right out from under me, and I started to go. And I want you to understand, Mrs. Ashford, there was no time to think about it. There was no decision anybody could have made with their brain. There was just this. He lifted one hand, an old involuntary gesture, this shove. This man grabbed a fistful of my jacket, and he threw me, uphill, onto the solid part, used the last of the ground under his own feet to do it. No, Victoria said. It came out very small. He was smiling when he did it. Caleb's voice had gone rough. That's the part I can't. That's the part I've carried for 12 years. He wasn't scared. He grabbed me, and he threw me clear. And the last thing I saw before the dark took him, he was smiling. Like he'd known the whole time it might come to that, and he was okay with it. Like some part of him had already made peace with the trade a long time ago. He drew a breath. The ground took him. And it took the road with it. And by the time the crews got lights down there was nothing but water. Victoria had sat down at some point. She didn't remember doing it. She was in a chair with both hands pressed flat over her mouth, and she was making no sound at all, and the tears were coming and coming. He never told me his name, Caleb said. There wasn't time for names. I never even knew if he was a local or somebody just passing through. And in the morning when the divers went down, they found a jacket. Caught on the rocks, empty, and this. He reached up and with great care lifted the silver anchor away from his chest and held it in his open palm. This was inside the jacket pocket. The chain was broken. I figure it snapped when he threw me. I think I felt it actually. I think it caught on my hand when he grabbed me, and it broke and it went into his pocket without either of us knowing. He looked at it. Nobody claimed it. Nobody claimed him. The report called him an unidentified civilian, a good Samaritan deceased. That was the whole record of the bravest man I ever saw in my life. 2 words, unidentified civilian. His name was Nathaniel, Victoria said. She could barely get it out. His name was Nathaniel Ashford. He was my husband. He was 38 years old and he made terrible eggs, and he laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them. And he did not just help with a rescue. That's what they told me. They told me he was assisting. They said the helicopter. She stopped. Caleb watched her, and understanding moved slowly across his face. There was no helicopter, she said. The realization was arriving even as she spoke it 10 years late, the whole shape of the lie rising up in front of her at last. Was there? The company, his family, his people. They told me it was a rescue helicopter that went down, an official thing sanctioned clean. A hero's death with paperwork. Because the truth was that my husband climbed down a cliff in a storm to save strangers, and no one could prove it, and no one wanted a billionaire's husband to have died as an unidentified civilian on a coast road with nothing to show for it. Her hands were shaking so hard now, the whole chair seemed to tremble. They gave me a lie because they thought the truth was too small. They thought a man who died anonymous was worth less than a man who died with a flag folded over him. They didn't understand. They didn't understand anything about him. Ma'am, the truth is bigger, she said fiercely, and for the first time all night, there was something other than grief in her voice. There was something like fire. Do you understand what you've just given me? For 10 years, I have imagined my husband dying alone, afraid. In the dark, thinking no one would ever know, thinking I would never know. I have lain awake at 3 a.m. for 10 years, imagining his last moments, and every single time they were lonely. She pointed at Caleb, at the necklace still lying open in his palm. And you're telling me he was smiling. You're telling me the last thing he did on this earth was throw a stranger to safety, and that he smiled doing it. Do you have any idea? She couldn't finish. She put her face in her hands, and she wept, and Caleb Dawson, a Navy commander who had faced down things that would break most men, sat across the table and let her, because he had learned a long time ago that there are moments where the only decent thing a man can do is be quiet and let someone cry. When she finally lifted her head, her makeup was ruined and her voice was hoarse, and she looked for the first time all evening not like a billionaire at all, just like a widow. "Why do you still wear it?" she asked. 10 years, 12. You had no idea who he was. You could have sold it. It's real silver. Why would you keep a stranger's necklace against your skin for 12 years? Caleb closed his hand around the anchor. "Because he saved my life," he said simply. "And because about 6 years after he did it, I found out exactly how much that life was worth. My wife Emily, she was killed in a highway accident. Avery was barely more than a baby. And I sat in a hospital hallway that night with my daughter asleep on my chest, and I thought, I can't do this. I cannot be a father and a sailor and a widower all at once. I don't have it in me. I'm not that strong." He opened his hand again and looked at the silver anchor. "And then I looked down, and I saw this. And I thought about the man in the storm. The man who gave me the life I was about to have to keep living the life where I'd get to raise my daughter. And I thought he didn't get to raise anybody. He gave that up. He gave it up for me, a stranger, without even knowing my name. The least I can do is be worth it." He fastened the necklace back around his own neck and tucked it away under his collar, and the little silver anchor disappeared. "So I kept going," he said. "Every deployment, every school lunch I packed at 4 in the morning before I shipped out every night. Avery cried for her mama, and I didn't know what to say. I kept this on, because it reminded me that somebody once decided I was worth dying for. And a man who somebody died to save doesn't get to quit. He just doesn't." He looked at Victoria steady again, the grief folded back down into something he could carry. "I tried to find his family. 12 years I tried, wrote letters, called the Coast Guard, the county, the state. But the record just said unidentified, and after a while you stop expecting the door to open." A pause. "And then a woman I never met walked across a ballroom and grabbed my wrist and told me the scratch was on the bottom edge. And I knew before you even finished the sentence. I've been looking for you for 12 years, Mrs. Ashford. I just didn't know it was you I was looking for." Victoria reached across the table. She didn't take the necklace. That surprised even her. Every instinct she'd walked into this room with had been, "That is mine, give it back." But sitting here now, watching this tired, honest man tuck her husband's anchor back against his own heart, she understood something she couldn't have understood an hour ago. The necklace had not been lost. It had not been stolen. It had been carried. For 12 years, when she couldn't carry Nathaniel any further, a stranger had picked him up and carried him for her. So she didn't reach for the necklace. She reached for his hand. "Thank you," she said. Caleb went still. "I came over there to take it back," she said, "and I'm not going to. I want you to keep wearing it." He'd have wanted you to keep wearing it. "I know that the way I know my own name." Her fingers tightened around his rough, scarred hand. "But I need something from you, Commander. I need you to tell me all of it. Every detail you remember. The whole night. What he said, how he moved, whether he seemed happy. Because I have 10 years of a lie to unlearn, and you are the only person alive who was with my husband when he died. Do you understand what that makes you?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "It makes you the last person who ever saw him," she said. "And I have spent a fortune, an actual fortune, trying to buy back 30 more seconds with my husband. And it can't be done. No amount of money can do it. But you were there for his last 30 seconds. You have something I can never buy, and never earn, and never deserve." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "So I am asking you, not as Victoria Ashford, just as his wife. Please, tell me about the night my husband died." And through the wall faint, they could both hear a little girl laughing at something on a cartoon, laughing the free and easy laugh of a child who has no idea, yet what it costs the grown-ups to keep the world safe enough for her to laugh in the laugh of a child who was alive, because two men she would never fully understand had once climbed down into a storm and refused to let each other go. Caleb turned his hand over under Victoria's and held on. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll tell you, all of it, everything I've got." And he began again from the beginning. The storm, the road, the family in the car, the stranger in the soaked-through jacket who went where no sane man would go, and this time Victoria didn't stop him, didn't question him, didn't brace for a lie. She just listened. Tears sliding down a face that hadn't let itself feel this much in 10 years. and for the length of one story in one quiet room. Her husband was alive again, brave and laughing and unafraid, doing the last and best thing he ever did. She had walked into that ballroom, believing she was there to remember the dead. She had no idea yet how completely the living were about to change her life. He told her everything, and it took the better part of an hour. He told her how Nathaniel had laughed once in the middle of it all, right in the teeth of the storm with a child in his arms, and the road crumbling under them. He'd laughed and said something about how his wife was going to kill him for ruining another jacket. He told her how the man's hands had been sure and steady the whole time, how he'd talked to those terrified kids in that same low, easy voice the entire way up the slope. He told her that when the ground gave and Nathaniel threw him clear, there hadn't been fear on the man's face. Only a kind of finished peace, the look of a man who had spent his whole life practicing for one decision and was almost glad to finally get to make it. Victoria listened to all of it without moving. And when Caleb finally ran out of words, she sat in the silence for a long time. "He hated that jacket," she said at last. Her voice was wrecked and wet, and underneath it almost smiling. "I bought it for him. He said it made him look like an insurance salesman. He wore it anyway because I liked it." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, ruining what was left of her makeup entirely. "And that's what he had on, at the end. The jacket he wore because it made me happy." "Yes, ma'am." "Stop calling me ma'am." It came out sharper than she meant it, and she caught herself. "I'm sorry. I don't mean I just... You knew my husband's last words, and you're calling me ma'am, like I'm your commanding officer. My name is Victoria." "Victoria," he said. "Better." They sat there. Through the wall, the cartoon had ended and started again, and Diane's voice murmured something, and the little girl answered, and there was the small clink of a fork on a plate that meant the promised chocolate cake had arrived. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said. "And you can tell me it's none of my business." "Go ahead. You said your husband's people told you it was a helicopter. Sanctioned. Official." He turned it over slowly, the way he turned everything over, examining it from all sides, before he set it down. "Who's his people? You said it like they weren't your people, too." Victoria's jaw tightened, and Caleb watched something come up in her that hadn't been in the room before, not grief this time. Something colder, something that had been waiting 10 years for the right moment. "Nathaniel had a brother," she said. "Gregory. And Nathaniel had a father, a horrible old man named Charles Ashford, who built a shipping fortune and spent his whole life ashamed that one of his sons wanted to be..." She gestured vaguely, "good instead of rich. Nathaniel walked away from all of it. From the family money, the family name, all of it. He and I built our own thing from nothing. And Charles never forgave him for it. Right up until the day Nathaniel died, that man treated my husband like an embarrassment. And when he died, Victoria said, suddenly the Ashfords cared very much about how the story got told." Her hands had gone flat on the table again. "I was destroyed. I couldn't function. I couldn't read a document. I couldn't answer a phone. And into that came Gregory and Charles and their lawyers, and they handled everything. The arrangements, the press, the narrative. And I let them because I couldn't stand up, and I trusted God help me. I trusted that they loved him enough to tell the truth. But they didn't. They gave me a helicopter." Her voice cracked on the word. "A clean, official, respectable helicopter crash, a sanctioned Coast Guard operation, a death with medals attached, and I believed it for 10 years because why on earth would anyone lie about that? Who lies about how a man died? What could you possibly gain?" Caleb was quiet a moment. "A lot of things," he said, "depending on what the truth was worth." Victoria looked up at him sharply. And in that look, something passed between them. The first shared understanding of two people who had both spent their lives learning in very different ways that the world does not tell the truth for free. "I need to know why," she said. "I need to know why they did it, because a helicopter crash and a man drowning off a cliff road. Both of my husband is dead at the end of both of them. Both of them are grief. So why would anyone go to the trouble of building the lie? What was the truth costing them that they'd rather pay in lies?" She stood up abruptly, and the chair scraped back. "I have to go home. I have to look at things I haven't looked at in 10 years. I have documents I never read because I couldn't bear to read them. Insurance filings, estate paperwork. I signed my name to 100 things in that first month, and I don't remember a single one of them because I signed them all through tears with Gregory's hand guiding mine. Victoria. Caleb rose too. It's the middle of the night, and you've had a shock that would put most people flat on their backs. Whatever's in those papers, it's been there 10 years. It'll be there tomorrow. She stopped and looked at him. You sound like you're worried about me, she said. I am. You met me 45 minutes ago. I screamed at you in front of 300 people. I frightened your daughter. You did? He said it plainly, no softening. And then you sat in that chair, and you listened to me tell you the worst and best thing I've ever seen, and you thanked me for it, and you told me to keep the necklace. So. He shrugged that same tired, honest shrug. I've made up my mind about people on less. Something moved through Victoria's chest, warm and unexpected, and almost painful. It had been a very long time since anyone had worried about her without also wanting something. Her people worried about her stock price. Her board worried about her decisions. Nobody in 10 years had simply stood in a room and been worried that she was tired. Come to my house tomorrow, she heard herself say. Both of you. You and Avery. I'll send a car. There are things in my study I want to go through, and She faltered and pushed through it. I don't think I can do it alone. And you're the only person alive who knows what's true. If I find the lie, I'll need someone to tell me I'm not imagining it. Caleb studied her. You've got a whole company of people, he said. Assistants, lawyers. You don't need a Navy commander you met an hour ago to hold your papers. No, Victoria agreed. I need the man my husband died to save. There's a difference, and I think you know exactly what it is. For a long moment, Caleb didn't answer. Then he nodded once. We'll come, he said. The car came at 10 the next morning. Avery pressed her face to the window, the whole way, gasping at the gate, the drive, the house rising up white and enormous at the end of it. Caleb sat beside her in his one good civilian jacket, and when the car stopped, he took a breath like a man going into cold water and got out. Victoria met them at the door herself. No staff. She'd sent everyone away. She looked like she hadn't slept because she hadn't, but there was something lit in her eyes that Caleb recognized because he'd worn it himself in the worst weeks of his life. It was the look of a person who has stopped grieving and started hunting. You didn't sleep, he said. Neither did you. No. Good. She stepped back to let them in. Then we're both useless and honest, which is exactly the condition I need to do this in. She crouched down to Avery's level, and this time there was nothing frightening in her at all, just a tired woman making herself gentle. Hello, Avery. I'm so sorry I scared you last night. I was very upset about something, and I took it out in the wrong place, and that was wrong of me. Will you let me make it up to you? Avery considered this with the grave seriousness of a 7-year-old. How? Well, Victoria said. It so happens I have a kitchen the size of a basketball court, and absolutely no children to eat anything out of it. I have been told there is ice cream. I have been told there might be a movie room. And I have a housekeeper named Rosa, who has been dying to spoil somebody for about a decade. Avery looked up at her father. Caleb nodded. And the little girl, satisfied that the necessary permissions had been obtained, put her small hand into Victoria's without a second thought. Something happened to Victoria's face when that little hand closed around her fingers. Caleb saw it and looked away because it felt like watching something private. Rosa took Avery, and then it was just the two of them again walking down a hallway lined with photographs, and Caleb slowed at one of them without meaning to. It was Nathaniel. Younger years, younger than the man in the storm with his arm around a laughing, dark-haired woman who could only have been Victoria, both of them sunburned and windblown on the deck of some cheap little sailboat that looked one wave away from sinking. That's him, Caleb said quietly. He'd never seen the man's face in daylight. Only in the flashing dark of that night, rain-streaked, half-lit. That's really him. That's the summer we couldn't afford the boat, Victoria said, stopping beside him. We rented it for a week and spent the whole month before eating cereal to pay for it, worth every bite. Her voice was steady, but only just. He looks happy there, doesn't he? He looks like a man who laughs at his own jokes before he finishes them. Victoria let out a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. God, she said. You did know him, In 30 seconds you knew him better than half the people at that gala last night. The study was enormous and dim and smelled of old paper, and on the great desk, Victoria had already laid everything out, boxes and folders and envelopes she'd dragged up from somewhere in the small hours, a decade of documents she had never been able to make herself open. "I don't even know what I'm looking for," she admitted, standing over it. "I just know that if they lied about the helicopter, they lied for a reason, and reasons like that leave tracks. Somewhere in here is a track." She looked at him. "I run a company worth billions of dollars, Commander. I read contracts for breakfast. I could take apart a hostile acquisition in my sleep. And I have never once been able to open a single one of these boxes because the man in them is my husband, and I couldn't bear it." She swallowed. "So, will you help me bear it?" "Sit down," Caleb said. "You take that side. I'll take this one. Anything with a date on it near the accident we set aside. Anything with a lawyer's name on it we set aside. We're not reading for grief. We're reading for the lie. You understand? That's the only way to do a thing like this. You look for the one detail that doesn't fit, and you don't let yourself feel anything about the rest until you find it. How do you know how to do this? Because it's what you do after a mission goes wrong," he said simply. "You lay out everything that happened, and you look for the one thing that shouldn't be there. Feelings come later. Feelings will drown you if you let them in while you're still looking." He sat. "Emily taught me that, actually. My wife. She was a paralegal. She could go through a stack of documents like a hot knife. I used to watch her do it." A small, sad smile. "I learned from the best. Let's find your track." They worked for 2 hours in near silence, and it was Caleb who found it. "Victoria." His voice had changed. She looked up. He was holding a single sheet of paper, an insurance form, and his face had gone very still. "What was Ashford Global worth the year your husband died?" "I don't a great deal. We'd just closed the harbor development deal. It made us. Why? And who owned it, the company, legally, on paper? Nathaniel and I, split, 50-50. We built it together. We owned it together. That was always the—" She stopped. Something had come into Caleb's face. "What? What is it?" "There's a clause," he said slowly. "Right here. In the key person insurance policy on your husband. There's a payout, a large one, a very large one that triggers on his death. Standard enough, big companies do it. But there's a condition on it." He turned the page around and slid it across the desk to her and pointed. "Read that line." Victoria read it. And Caleb watched the color drain out of her face. "In the event of death by accidental means," she read aloud, her voice going flat and strange, "the policy pays in full to the surviving corporate officers. In the event of death occurring during the commission of voluntary hazardous activity not sanctioned by the company," she stopped. "Keep going. The policy is void." Victoria set the page down very carefully, as if it might detonate. "It's void. If he died doing something reckless, something not company sanctioned, like climbing down a cliff in a storm to save strangers," Caleb said. The silence in the study was total. "A helicopter crash pays out," Victoria said. Her voice had gone somewhere far away. "An official operation. A sanctioned thing. That pays. But a man who dies as an unidentified civilian doing a reckless, heroic thing on his own, that voids the policy. That's how much money. How much was the policy?" Caleb looked at the number and told her. Victoria stood up. She walked to the window. She stood with her back to him for a long time, and her shoulders were shaking, and when she spoke, her voice was terrible. "They didn't lie to protect his memory," she said. "They didn't lie to make his death sound grander. I told myself all night that maybe there was even something kind in it, some misguided family pride that Charles couldn't stand his son dying anonymous, so he dressed it up." She turned around and her face was wet, but her eyes were blazing. "They lied for the money. They invented a helicopter so the insurance would pay. They took the truest, bravest, most him thing my husband ever did, the thing that defines who he was, and they erased it. They buried it. Because the truth was worth less to them than the check. Victoria, 10 years. She was shaking all over now. 10 years I have grieved a lie because it was more profitable than the truth. 10 years I have imagined him dying alone and afraid in a helicopter. when the truth is he died smiling, saving your life, being exactly the man I fell in love with. And they took that from me. They took his last act of courage and they filed it away as an inconvenient liability. Gregory looked me in the eye at that funeral. He held my hand while I signed the papers. He guided my hand. Her voice broke into pieces. And every one of those papers I signed helped bury the truth about how my husband died. Caleb was up and around the desk before he'd decided to move. He didn't touch her. He wasn't sure she'd want to be touched, but he stood close, the way he'd stand near Avery, in the middle of a nightmare present, and solid. "Listen to me," he said. "Listen. You didn't bury anything. You were destroyed and grieving, and people you trusted used that against you. That's not the same as being fooled, Victoria. That's being betrayed. There's a difference, and I need you to hold on to it, because if you start blaming yourself for their lie, you'll drown. And I've watched good people drown in exactly that water. How do I not blame myself? I signed. You signed papers you couldn't read put in front of you by family in the worst week of your life, while a lie you had no reason to doubt held your hand." His voice was low and steady, and absolutely certain. "That's not your shame. That's theirs. All of it. Every ounce." Victoria looked up at him, and for a moment she just breathed. "He saved 5 people's lives that night," she said finally. 5 strangers and you. And then he saved his own family's insurance money without ever knowing it because his death was accidental on paper. And they cashed it. They cashed it, Caleb. They spent it." She wiped her face, and something hardened in her, that same cold hunting thing from the doorway that morning, but colder now and sure. "I let them handle everything because I couldn't stand up. Well." She straightened, and the billionaire came back into her spine, the woman who could freeze a boardroom with an eyebrow. "I can stand up now. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to prove it." She began gathering the documents sharp and fast, all the grief for the moment folded down into pure momentum. "The insurance clause is the motive. Now I need the proof of the lie itself, the real report. The one that says unidentified civilian. The one Charles and Gregory made disappear so the fake one could take its place." She stopped and looked at Caleb, and something in her expression changed. You were there. You were on that rescue. You're a Navy officer. There'd be a record. A real record. A military one. Your after-action report." "There would be," Caleb said slowly. "There is. I filed it. I named a civilian who assisted and was lost. It's real, and it's official, and it exists somewhere in a Navy archive right now, and it has been the whole time." He stared at her. "For 12 years, I had the truth in a filing cabinet, and I didn't know it mattered to a single living soul. Nobody ever came asking, because the family that should have been asking already knew and was hiding it. Can you get it?" "I can get it. Then we have both halves." Victoria's hands had stopped shaking. "The Navy report says he died a reckless hero saving strangers. The insurance clause says a reckless hero's death pays nothing. And the estate paperwork says the family collected a fortune anyway on a helicopter that never existed." She laid it out like a woman closing a deal. Motive, method, and the proof of the lie. That's not grief anymore, Commander. That's fraud. That's 10 years of it sitting in my own study, waiting for someone to finally read the papers I couldn't bear to open. Caleb was quiet a moment, watching her, and when he spoke there was something careful in it. "Victoria, before you go to war with your husband's family, and that's what this is, you understand that this is a war. I want you to be sure of why you're doing it." He held her eyes. "Because if you're doing it for the money, don't. You don't need it, and it'll rot you. And if you're doing it for revenge, be careful, because revenge feels like justice, right up until the second it's done, and then it just feels empty. I've seen men chase it their whole lives. It never fills the hole." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not doing it for the money," she said. "You're right, I don't need it, and they can keep every filthy dollar of it if it comes to that. And I'm not even doing it for revenge, though. God knows I want it." She picked up the photograph from the desk, the one of the sailboat, the sunburned laughing couple, and held it against her chest. "I'm doing it because for 10 years the world has believed a lie about who my husband was in the last moment of his life. The record says helicopter. The record says accident. The record says a rich man who died in a sanctioned operation with medals attached." Her voice dropped fierce and low. And the truth is, he was the bravest, kindest, most reckless good man who ever lived, and he died throwing a stranger to safety with a smile on his face. And I will not let the last true thing about Nathaniel Ashford stay buried in a filing cabinet because his father found it inconvenient. He deserves the truth. You deserve it. You've carried it alone for 12 years. And so do those 5 people he saved, whoever they are, who probably don't even know his name. She set the photograph down. That's why. Not money. Not even revenge. The truth. His truth. I'm going to give my husband back the death he actually died. For a long moment, Caleb didn't say anything. Then he nodded slow and deep, the nod of one soldier acknowledging another. Okay, he said. Then I'm with you. All the way. You get the paperwork on your end, I'll pull the after-action report on mine. He paused. But Victoria, they're going to fight. A family that would forge a man's death to collect on a policy isn't going to just fold when you knock on the door. They're going to be scared, and scared people who've already committed fraud are dangerous. They'll come at you. They'll come at your company. They might even come at me or at... He stopped, and Victoria saw the exact instant the father overtook the officer in him, saw the flash of pure animal alarm. At my daughter, anyone who's suddenly a threat to $100 million lie. Then we're careful, Victoria said. We're quiet. We don't tip them off until we have every piece nailed down and there's nothing left to fight. And in the meantime... She hesitated and then plunged ahead because she'd been thinking it since the car ride, and there was no point pretending otherwise. In the meantime, you and Avery are not going back to that little apartment where anyone could find you. There's a guest house on this property. Staff quarters, gate security walls, a tank couldn't get through. You'll stay here. Victoria, I can't. You can. And before your pride climbs all the way up your throat, hear me out. She held up a hand. This isn't charity. And it isn't pity, and it's got nothing to do with me being rich and you being however you'd put it. You are about to help me tear down a lie that a very powerful family has protected for 10 years. And doing that from a walk-up apartment with your 7-year-old daughter home alone half the day is not safe, and you know it's not safe. I saw your face just now. So this is not me being generous. This is me protecting the man my husband died to save and his little girl while he helps me do a dangerous thing. Those are different, and I think a man like you knows the difference. Caleb opened his mouth, closed it. Down the hall faintly they could both hear Avery's laughter, and then Rosa's laughter, answering it the warm, bright sound of a lonely house filling up with something it hadn't held in 10 years. She sounds happy, Caleb said quietly. She's the first happy sound this house has made since Nathaniel died, Victoria said. Do you have any idea what that's worth to me? More than the whole insurance policy. Please. Let her be happy here while we do the hard thing. Let me give that little girl a safe place. It's... Her voice caught. It's the closest I'll ever come to giving something back to the man who saved you. For a long moment, Caleb Dawson stood in the study of a house he could never have afforded a Navy commander with a repaired uniform and a dead wife and a fatherless girl down the hall, and everything in him that had spent 40 years refusing help, fought against everything in him that had spent 6 years terrified he couldn't keep his daughter safe alone. And then he thought about the man in the storm. The stranger who'd have given him anything. Okay, he said. For Avery. We'll stay until this is done. Thank you. But Victoria. He fixed her with a look, and there was iron in it. The iron that had kept a broken man standing through 6 years he shouldn't have survived. When this is over, when the truth is out, and the record's fixed, and your husband's got his real death back, Avery and I go home. I'm not looking to be kept. I don't want the money. I don't want the guest house forever. I don't want to become some project. I've got my pride, and it's about all I've got, and I'm not trading it. You understand me? I understand you, Victoria said. And then quieter, with something she hadn't let herself feel in 10 years, moving underneath the words, but I think you might be wrong about one thing, Commander. What's that? I don't think when this is over you're going to want to go anywhere. She looked toward the sound of the little girl's laughter down the hall and back at him, and there was nothing calculated in her face at all. And I don't think I'm going to want you to. Caleb Dawson had faced enemy firestorms that swallowed helicopters and the worst night of his life in a hospital hallway with his daughter asleep on his chest. He had never in his life been more thoroughly at a loss for what to say than he was in that moment in a rich woman's study, holding the truth about a dead man in his hands and feeling something in his chest come loose that he'd bolted down tight 6 years ago and sworn never to open again. So he didn't say anything. He just picked up the next document off the pile and cleared his throat and got back to work. But Victoria saw the color that had come up in his weathered face, and for the first time in 10 years, standing in the room where she'd grieved the longest, she felt something that was almost like hope. They worked through the afternoon and into the evening, and piece by piece, page by page, the shape of the lie rose up out of the boxes she had never been able to open. Dates that didn't match a Coast Guard operation number that led nowhere, a signature from a family lawyer on a document that should never have needed a lawyer at all. Every piece of it another thread in the thing Charles and Gregory Ashford had woven 10 years ago over the truth of how a good man died. And somewhere in the quiet, in the passing of one document from her hands to his, and back again without either of them naming it or noticing. The exact moment it happened, Victoria Ashford and Caleb Dawson stopped being two strangers a dead man had connected by accident. They started being two people building something together. The silver anchor rested against Caleb's chest, hidden under his collar, warm from his skin. And for the first time in 12 years, it wasn't a stranger's necklace at all. It was a promise being kept between the man who wore it and the woman who'd given it a promise that the truth Nathaniel Ashford died for would not stay buried one day longer than it took the two of them to dig it out into the light. Outside, the sun went down over the memorial garden where his name was carved in stone under a lie, and neither of them saw it because both of them were bent over the desk, reading at last every word. It took Caleb 3 weeks to get the after-action report. He'd expected it to be simple. Pull his own file, request a copy done. It was not simple. The report existed. He could see it existed in the system index. But every time he requested the full document, the response came back the same restricted contact records custodian. A 12-year-old search and rescue after-action report on a routine civilian assist had no earthly reason to be restricted, and Caleb Dawson had been in the Navy long enough to know that when a door that should be open is quietly locked, somebody locked it on purpose. They got to it. He told Victoria one night in the study, the two of them at the desk that had become their war room. Avery was asleep in the guest house. Rosa had left a pot of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The report's sealed. Somebody with money and reach put a restriction on a document that has no business being restricted, and they did it years ago, and they did it quiet. Charles, or Gregory, somebody who knew that report was the one piece of paper that could unravel everything. Caleb leaned back, rubbing his eyes. You have to understand how careful this is. To seal a military record, you need standing. You need a reason on file. You need somebody inside willing to sign off. This wasn't a phone call. This was a campaign. They didn't just lie once at the funeral, Victoria. They've been maintaining the lie for 10 years, actively. Somebody has been guarding it. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had gone very cold and very precise. The voice Caleb was learning that meant she'd stopped feeling and started calculating. That changes things, she said. How? A single lie at a funeral is a crime of opportunity. Grief, panic, a family grabbing at money in a terrible week. I could almost not forgive it, but understand it. People do desperate things in desperate weeks. She stood and walked to the window, arms crossed. But 10 years of maintaining it, sealing records, watching, guarding. That's not desperation, Caleb. That's a decade of cold, deliberate, ongoing choice. Every single day for 10 years, Gregory Ashford woke up and chose again to keep the truth about his own brother buried. Every day. For money. She turned around. I was going to give them a chance. Did you know that some part of me this whole time has been holding on to the idea that I'd confront them and they'd break down and confess and there'd be grief, shame, something human. Her jaw tightened. But you don't seal a record for 10 years if there's anything human left in you. They're not going to break down. They're going to fight to the death. So we fight to the death first, Victoria. Who sealed it? She crossed back to the desk. Can you find out who signed the restriction? There's a name, isn't there? There's always a name. There's a name. Caleb pulled a printout toward him. It took me a week of favors to even get this much. The restriction was requested through a private security consultant, former military, guy named Harlan Voss. He watched Victoria's face. Mean anything to you? It did. He saw it land. Harlan Voss, she said slowly, runs the security firm my father-in-law has kept on retainer for 30 years. Charles Ashford doesn't buy a newspaper without Voss knowing about it. She sat down hard. So it's confirmed. Charles himself. He sealed the report. He reached into a Navy archive, and he locked away the truth about how his own son died, and he's paid a man to keep it locked for a decade. Which means, Caleb said, the second we start pulling on this Voss knows, and the second Voss knows Charles knows. And then, it's a race us proving the truth versus them destroying the last of the evidence and burying us in lawyers. Then we don't pull on it directly. Victoria's mind was moving now fast, the CEO fully awake. We don't request the report again. We don't tip Voss that anyone's looking. We go around. She grabbed a legal pad. The report is one piece. It's the cleanest piece, but it's not the only piece. You said 5 people were saved that night. 5 civilians, 2 adults, 3 children. Yes, those people are alive, Caleb. Somewhere out there are 5 human beings who were pulled out of a car in a storm by my husband, and at least 2 of them were adults who could see, who could remember who watched a stranger in an insurance salesman jacket climb down a cliff to save their kids. Her eyes were bright. They're witnesses, living witnesses. Voss can seal a report, but he can't seal 5 people's memories. If we can find even one of them. That's 12 years ago, Caleb said, but he was leaning forward now, too. People move. Kids grow up. And I never got names. It was chaos. We handed them to the crews, and the crews took over. But the crews filed reports. The county filed a report on the accident itself. The car, the guardrail. That's a public record. That's not sealed. Why would it be? Charles sealed the military report because that's the one that named Nathaniel. But the county sheriff's accident report, the one about a car going off the road, that just names the family in the car. She was writing fast. We find the county report. We find the family's name. We find the family. Caleb looked at her with something close to awe. You'd have made a hell of an investigator. I'd have made a hell of a lot of things, Victoria said, not looking up. I made a CEO instead because it paid better and hurt less. Turns out I was wrong about the second part. She tore off the sheet. The county report. Can you get it? That one I can get. That one's public. He hesitated. Victoria, if we find these people, you understand what you might be asking of them. Right? You'd be asking 5 strangers to walk into a war against one of the richest, most connected families on the coast. To go on record. To testify, maybe. Against people who seal military archives for fun. That's a lot to ask of somebody whose only connection to any of this is that your husband saved their life 12 years ago. Victoria's hand stopped. You're right, she said quietly. You're right. It is a lot to ask. She set the pen down. But I think people might surprise you, Caleb. I think when someone saves your life and your children's lives and asks for nothing, and then you find out years later that the world doesn't even know his name, I think a person might want to help set that right. I think a person might have been waiting 12 years for the chance. She looked at him. You wore his necklace for 12 years for a man you couldn't even name. Why would they be any different? Caleb had no answer for that. Because she was right. The county accident report took 4 days. It named a family, the Reyeses, Miguel and Sofia Reyes, and their 3 children of a small town 2 hours up the coast. The report was dry and bureaucratic, and never once mentioned a civilian rescuer at all. The story had been sanitized on that end too, or simply never recorded, but it gave them a name, and a name was a thread, and Victoria Ashford pulled it. It wasn't hard in the end. The Reyeses still lived in the same town. Miguel ran a hardware store. Sofia taught 3rd grade. And when Victoria called, she made the call herself. No assistant sitting in the study with Caleb beside her, and the phone on speaker. An older man's voice answered, wary at first the way people are wary of unknown numbers. Mr. Reyes, Victoria said, and her voice, which could command boardrooms, came out unsteady. "My name is Victoria Ashford. You don't know me. I'm calling about something that happened a long time ago. 12 years ago. A storm on the coast road. Your family was in an accident." The silence on the line was so long she thought he'd hung up. "Who is this?" Miguel Reyes said finally, and his voice had changed completely. It had gone raw. "My name is Victoria Ashford, my husband." "The man," Miguel said. "You're calling about the man." She heard him breathing. She heard distantly a woman's voice ask something in the background, and Miguel's muffled reply, and then the woman's voice, much closer, urgent. "The man who came down. Ma'am, are you calling about the man who came down for my kids?" Victoria couldn't speak. Caleb reached over and took her hand. "Yes," she managed. "His name was Nathaniel. Nathaniel Ashford. He was my husband. And he didn't survive that night, Mr. Reyes. He died saving your family. And I only just found out 12 years later how he really died. Almost nobody knows. His name was never recorded, and I'm trying to—" She heard Miguel Reyes start to cry. She heard a grown man, a hardware store owner 2 hours up the coast, break down completely on the phone. And she heard his wife take the phone from him. And Sofia Reyes came on the line with a voice shaking so hard it could barely form words. "We have looked for him," Sofia said. "Mrs. Ashford, we have looked for that man for 12 years. We never knew his name. Nobody could tell us. The crew said a civilian helped and was lost, and they had no name. And we didn't even know how to grieve him. We didn't know who to grieve. My children are alive because a man with no name climbed down a cliff in a storm and handed them up to the Navy boy one at a time and he told them, being brave means scared, but doing it anyway," Victoria whispered. Sofia Reyes made a sound like her heart had been torn open. Yes. That's how to you, my daughter, my Lucia. She was 5. She has said that to herself every hard day of her life for 12 years, and she doesn't even know where it came from. She just knows a man in the rain. Said it to her when he saved her." Sofia was sobbing now. "We named our 4th child after him. We didn't know his name, so we named him. We named our son Angel because that's what he was. That's the only word we had. We had no name." Victoria was weeping. Caleb had his hand over his mouth. And in the guest house, a little girl slept safe and up the coast. A family that had spent 12 years grieving a nameless angel finally learned his name. "Nathaniel," Sofia repeated like she was memorizing it. "Nathaniel Ashford. Miguel, his name was Nathaniel." And then back to Victoria, fierce through the tears. "Mrs. Ashford, whatever you need, whatever you are doing, whatever this call is really about, because I can hear it. I can hear that something is wrong, that this isn't just a phone call. Whatever you need from us, the answer is yes. Before you even ask it, the answer is yes. That man gave me my children. There is nothing on this earth I would not do to honor him. Do you understand me? Nothing." And Victoria Ashford, who had spent 10 years believing she was utterly alone in her grief, understood in that moment that she had never been alone at all. That out there, scattered along a coastline, were people whose lives her husband had saved, who had carried him in their hearts for 12 years without a name to call him, and who would rise every one of them the instant she asked. She told the Reyeses everything: the insurance clause, the sealed report, the lie. Miguel came back on the line halfway through, and the two of them listened in a silence that grew harder and angrier with every word. And when she was done, Miguel Reyes said in a voice like cold iron, "They hid him to keep the money. They took the man who saved my babies and they filed him away." A long breath. "Mrs. Ashford, I will stand in any courtroom in this country. I will look any judge in the eye. I will tell them exactly what I saw that night, and so will Sofia, and so will my Lucia, who's 17 now, and remembers every second of it. You want witnesses? You have got a whole family of them, and I promise you this, we are not the only ones. There were other cars stopped on that road. Other people who saw. That man did not save us in secret. People saw." When Victoria hung up the phone, she sat perfectly still for a long moment. Then she looked at Caleb, and there were tears on her face. But there was also something else now, something that had been missing for 10 years and had finally fully returned. "We're going to win," she said quietly. "Aren't we? We've got a shot. Caleb said. A real one. Witnesses the family can't seal. Living people who saw the truth. He squeezed her hand. But Victoria, the closer we get, the more dangerous they get. We just made phone calls to another state. We pulled a county report. If Voss is any good, and he is, he's already noticed activity around a case that's been quiet for a decade. We need to assume they know somebody's looking. We need to assume they're already moving. He was right. They were. It started 3 days later. It started small the way these things do. A story appeared in a business gossip column, the kind of thing nobody important reads and everybody important reads. It suggested in that oily, deniable way such columns have that Victoria Ashford, longtime widow and CEO of Ashford Global, had been seen keeping close company with a much younger Navy officer of limited means who had the item noted recently and conveniently moved onto her estate with his young daughter. It wondered delicately whether grief had finally caught up with the famously private billionaire. It wondered whether the board of Ashford Global was aware. It used the word vulnerable. It used the word erratic. It mentioned twice the size of her fortune and the modesty of the commanders. Victoria read it in the study at 7 in the morning, and her hand shook not with hurt, but with rage. They're not going after the fraud, she said when Caleb came in. She turned the tablet around. They're not defending the lie at all. They're going after me. Read it. They're painting me as a grieving woman who's lost her judgment and taken up with a gold-digging soldier who's manipulating a vulnerable widow. Her voice climbed. It's brilliant, Caleb. God help me. It's brilliant. If they can make the world believe I'm unstable, then anything I say about Nathaniel's death, the insurance, the sealed report, all of it, it's just the ravings of a grief-crazed woman being led around by a con man. They're not going to fight my evidence. They're going to destroy my credibility so the evidence never gets heard. Caleb read it in silence. And as he read, his face changed not with anger exactly, but with something older and more dangerous, the still cold calm of a man who has just watched an enemy make a very serious mistake. They put my daughter in it, he said quietly. What? His young daughter? He set the tablet down with great care. They mentioned Avery, in a smear piece designed to paint me as a gold digger. They used a 7-year-old girl who lost her mother as a prop in a story to protect their money. He was very, very calm, and Victoria found the calmness far more frightening than shouting would have been. I have spent 6 years, Victoria, keeping that little girl out of the worst of everything. Away from the pity, away from the news, away from everything ugly. And these people, to keep an insurance check, put her in a gossip column to make me look like a criminal. He looked up. That was a mistake. That was the worst mistake they could have made. Caleb. I've been telling myself this whole time that I'm helping you, he said. That this is your fight, your husband, your family, and I'm the support, the witness, the muscle maybe. He stood. It's not that anymore. The second they used my daughter to protect the lie about the man who saved my life, this became my fight too, all the way to the bottom of it. I want you to understand that because it changes how far I'm willing to go, and I don't want you surprised by it later. Victoria looked at this man, this proud, quiet, honest man who had refused her money and refused her guest house and refused everything, except the one thing she'd finally understood he couldn't refuse, which was a chance to protect a child and honor a debt. And she felt something in her chest that she had not felt in 10 years and had been afraid she'd never feel again. They think I'm vulnerable, she said slowly, and now her voice had gone cold, too cold and level, and absolutely lethal, the voice of a woman who had clawed a fortune out of nothing and buried her rage for a decade and had finally been given a place to put it. They think I'm a grieving widow who's lost her judgment. Let me tell you something about that commander. For 10 years, they had a vulnerable widow. For 10 years, I was exactly what they're pretending I still am, broken. Unable to read a document, signing whatever was put in front of me, too destroyed to ask a single question. She stood and drew herself up, and Caleb watched the last of the grief burn off her like fog off water. That widow is dead. They killed her the night you walked into my gala wearing my husband's necklace. And what's standing here now is the woman who took 2 rooms and built an empire. And she is done being handled, and she is done being managed, and she is done letting powerful men decide what the truth about her husband gets to be. She picked up the phone. "Who are you calling?" "My lawyers," Victoria said. "My real lawyers, not the family's." And then, the best investigative journalist in the country, who has wanted to sit down with me for 6 years, and is about to get the story of her career. And then, her jaw set, Harlan Voss. "Personally, because I want that man to hear my voice, and I want him to carry a message back to Charles Ashford for me." "What message?" Victoria looked at the photograph on the desk. Nathaniel sunburned and laughing on a sinking sailboat, a man who'd once climbed down a cliff in a storm because it never occurred to him not to. "That his son is not for sale," she said. "That he was never for sale. That Charles could bury the truth for 10 years, but he can't bury it for 11 because there's a widow who finally read the papers, and a Navy commander who never stopped wearing the necklace, and a family up the coast who named their baby after a nameless angel, and we are all coming together into the light, whether the Ashfords like it or not." She lifted the phone. "Tell him the anchor held." Caleb stared at her. "The anchor held," he repeated. "He'll understand." Victoria's eyes were wet and blazing all at once. "Nathaniel used to say it, about the two of us when things got hard, that an anchor's only worth anything in a storm that any fool can hold steady in calm water, but the whole point of an anchor is to hold when everything's trying to tear you loose." She pressed the phone to her ear. "Well, it's a storm now, the biggest one yet, and I intend to hold." She made the calls, all of them, and somewhere across the city in a mahogany office belonging to a private security consultant named Harlan Voss. A phone rang and a message was taken, and a man who had spent 10 years being paid very well to keep a certain door locked went pale as he wrote down 4 words a billionaire had asked him to deliver to the old man who signed his checks. The anchor held. She knows. She. By nightfall, the war the Ashfords had been quietly winning for a decade had finally at last become a war with 2 sides. Charles Ashford called her himself 2 days later. Victoria had known he would. A man like Charles didn't send lawyers to a fight he thought he could still win with his own voice. Lawyers were for later, for cleanup. First, he would come himself, because for 81 years, Charles Ashford had believed there was no room he couldn't dominate, and no person he couldn't bend, and he was not going to let a decade of careful work come apart without at least trying to bend her the way he'd bent everyone else his whole life. Her assistant put the call through to the study, and Victoria let it ring 3 times before she answered, and Caleb sat across from her silent listening. "Victoria," Charles said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it, warm on top granite underneath the voice of a man who had never once in his life doubted he was the smartest person on any call. "My dear girl, I've been worried sick about you." "Have you?" "Of course. These stories in the papers, this situation you've gotten yourself into." A pause delicate surgical. "A soldier and his child living on your property. Victoria people are talking. My people are talking. The board is nervous. I'm calling as family as the closest thing to a father you have left to ask you gently whether you're quite yourself these days." Victoria closed her eyes, and she understood listening to him exactly what she was up against. Because it was masterful. There was not one word in it she could point to and call an attack. It was all concern, all love, all the smooth, poisonous care of a man who had spent a decade making sure that if she ever did learn the truth, the world would already be prepared to believe she'd simply lost her mind. "I'm quite myself, Charles," she said. "For the first time in 10 years, actually. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like." "Victoria, I know about the insurance policy." She said it plainly, and she heard across the line the smallest catch in his breathing, the first crack in 81 years of granite. "I know about the clause that voids the payout if he died doing something reckless and unsanctioned. I know you invented a helicopter so the money would pay. And I know you had Harlan Voss seal the Navy's after-action report so no one could ever prove that my husband, your son, died climbing down a cliff in a storm to save 5 strangers." Her voice didn't shake at all now. "So let's not do the concerned father performance, Charles. It's very good. It's the best I've ever heard. But I know what you are now, and I'm not that girl at the funeral anymore, and you're not guiding my hand across any more papers." The silence stretched so long she thought the line had died. And then Charles Ashford laughed. It was a soft laugh, almost fond, and it was the most chilling thing Victoria had ever heard, because there was no fear in it at all. There was only a kind of weary amusement, the sound of a chess master watching a talented amateur make a move he'd anticipated 10 years ago. "So you found it," Charles said. All the warmth had drained out of his voice, and what was left underneath was pure iron cold and old and entirely unbothered. "I'll admit I'm impressed. I sealed that report myself. I've watched it for a decade. I did wonder sometimes if anyone would ever go looking." A pause. "It took a Navy officer and a necklace. Poetic. Nathaniel would have appreciated the poetry. He always was sentimental. It's what killed him in the end, that sentimental streak, that need to be good, where being smart would have served him better." "Don't," Victoria said very low. "Don't you talk about him. He was my son, Victoria. I'll talk about him however I like." The iron in him didn't rise, it just sat there immovable. "Let me save you a great deal of pain and money, because despite what you think, I don't enjoy this. You have a theory. A compelling one, I'm sure, with an insurance clause and some emotional witnesses. But here is what you don't have, my dear. You don't have that report. It's sealed, and it will stay sealed, because the man who can unseal it works for me. You don't have the original filings. Those were destroyed years ago legally in the ordinary course of records retention. And you don't have a single thing that ties me to any of it. What you have is a story. A sad, moving story about a heroic dead man and a wicked old father." His voice sharpened. "And do you know what happens to sad, moving stories told by grief-stricken widows who've taken up with penniless soldiers? Nothing, Victoria. Nothing happens to them at all, except the widow ends up looking exactly as unstable as everyone already suspects." Caleb was watching Victoria's face. He saw her hand tighten on the phone until the knuckles went white. And he saw, too, that she was not breaking. She was listening the way she'd taught him to read documents, looking for the one detail that shouldn't be there. "You seem very sure the report will stay sealed," she said. "It will. You keep saying that. The man who can unseal it works for me. You've said it twice now." Victoria's voice had changed, gone quiet and careful and dangerous. "Charles, you just told me on this call that you personally sealed a federal military record to conceal the circumstances of a death you profited from. You just said it out loud, to me." Another silence, and this one was different. This one had the smallest thread of something new in it. "You're recording this," Charles said. "No," Victoria said. "I'm not actually. That would be illegal in this state without your consent, and I don't break laws. Charles, that's the difference between us. It always has been. But I have a witness." She looked across the desk at Caleb. "Commander Caleb Dawson is sitting 3 feet away from me, and he heard every word you just said. A decorated Navy officer with an unimpeachable record. The same officer you smeared in the papers as a gold digger. I imagine he'll make a very credible witness when he testifies about the phone call in which Charles Ashford confessed to sealing a federal record." The temperature of the call dropped 10 degrees. "That's your witness," Charles said, and the contempt was back, but it was thinner, now stretched. "The gold-digging soldier who lives on your estate and stands to gain everything if you win. Who'll believe a word he says? I'll have 3 columnists painting him as your paid liar by Friday." "Maybe," Victoria said. "But you keep forgetting the part that you can't smear away Charles. You keep talking about me and Caleb like we're the whole case. We're not. We're not even the important part." She leaned forward. "There's a family up the coast named Reyes, a hardware store owner and a 3rd-grade teacher, and their 4 children. 4 Charles, because they named the youngest one Angel after the man with no name who saved his brothers and sisters. They've been grieving Nathaniel for 12 years without even knowing who to grieve. And now they know. And they will stand in any courtroom in this country and testify that they watched a man climb down a cliff in a storm to save their children. That family isn't on my payroll. That family can't be smeared as gold diggers. That family has no reason to lie and every reason on earth to tell the truth." Her voice rose steady and burning. "You sealed a report. Fine, but you can't seal 5 people's memories, and you can't seal a mother's gratitude, and you cannot. You cannot. Charles sealed the truth of what my husband did because he didn't do it in secret. People saw. People have always known. They were just waiting for someone to ask. The silence this time was total, and when Charles Ashford spoke again, his voice had lost something. Not much, but something. "What do you want?" he said flatly. And there it was, the pivot. The moment Victoria had been waiting for since she picked up the phone the moment the man stopped pretending he could win and started trying to buy his way out. "There it is," she said softly. "That's the Charles I remember, straight to the price." She let him wait a moment. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to unseal the report. You're going to sign a statement, a true one, correcting the record of how Nathaniel died. And you are going to return every dollar of that insurance payout, all of it, plus 10 years of interest. And it is not going to come to me, Charles. I don't want a cent of it. It's going to establish a foundation in my husband's name. And then you're going to stand up publicly and tell the world the truth about how your son died." Charles laughed again, but it was harsher, now real strain under it. "And why on God's green earth would I do any of that?" "Because if you don't," Victoria said, "the investigative journalist I've already spoken to, the best in the country, who has wanted to sit down with me for 6 years, runs the whole story. The insurance clause, the sealed report, Harlan Voss, the Reyes family, this phone call, all of it. And you spend the last years of your life, Charles, as the man who forged his own son's death to steal an insurance payout. That's your legacy. That's the headline they put next to your obituary. 81 years of building the Ashford name, and the last thing anyone will ever remember is that you sold your dead son for money." She let it land. "Or, you do the right thing 10 years too late, and you die as a man who made a terrible mistake and corrected it. Those are the two doors, Charles. There's no third one. I've closed all the third ones." For a long, long moment, Charles Ashford said nothing at all. "You were always the best of them," he said finally, and there was something almost like respect in it, and something almost like grief. "Better than my sons. Nathaniel married up when he married you, and he was the only one in this whole family who knew it. I'll consider what you've said." "Don't consider it long," Victoria said. "The story runs Friday either way. The only thing you control is whether you're the villain of it or the man who fixed it. Choose fast." She hung up, and then she put the phone down on the desk very carefully, and she sat back, and she began quietly to shake the reaction hitting her, now that the performance was over, the enormity of what she'd just done, of standing toe-to-toe with the man who'd terrified her whole married life, and refusing at last to bend. Caleb was around the desk in an instant. This time he didn't hesitate about touching her. He put both hands on her shoulders, and she reached up and gripped his forearm hard and held on. "You did it," he said. "Victoria, you did it. I've watched men in combat with less nerve than you just showed. You backed a man like that into a corner and you didn't blink." "I'm blinking now," she said with a shaky laugh. "God, I'm blinking now. Look at me." "You held," Caleb said quietly. The anchor held. She looked up at him, and in the aftermath of the storm in the study that had been her war room and her prison for 10 years, with the man her husband died to save standing over her with his hands on her shoulders and the silver anchor at his throat, something that had been building between them for weeks finally had nowhere left to hide. "Caleb," she said. "I know," he said. "You don't know what I was going to say." "I know exactly what you were going to say," he said, "because I've been trying not to say it myself for about 3 weeks and I've been losing." He crouched down so they were eye to eye. "But not now. Not like this. Not in the middle of a war when you're shaking, and I'm when we're both running on nothing but nerve and coffee in this thing we're fighting. Whatever this is between us, Victoria, it deserves better than to get born in the wreckage of a phone call with Charles Ashford. It deserves to happen on a good day, a calm day, when it's just us, and it doesn't have to be about anything except us." He reached up and very gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the first purely tender thing he'd ever done. "So hold that thought. Just hold it. We'll come back to it when the storm's passed. I promise." Victoria closed her eyes and leaned her forehead against his, just for a moment, and let herself be held by someone for the first time in 10 years. "Okay," she whispered, "when the storm's passed." The storm did not pass quietly. Charles considered for exactly 1 day, and then instead of choosing either of Victoria's doors, he tried to build a third one after all, because men like Charles Ashford cannot believe until the very last second that they've truly run out of moves. Harlan Voss came to the estate. He came at dusk alone in an unremarkable car, and he asked to speak with Caleb, not Victoria. Just Caleb. Man to man, he said, soldier to soldier. And Caleb, after a long look at Victoria, agreed to meet him at the gate in the open where the security cameras could see everything. Voss was ex-military like Caleb, and he wore it the same way in the shoulders and the stillness. He was perhaps 60, gray and hard and unhurried, and he looked at Caleb for a long moment before he spoke the way one professional sizes up another. "Commander Dawson," he said, "I've read your file. All of it, not just the parts that made the papers. 12 years, 4 deployments. Bronze Star, you never talk about. Widower, raising a little girl alone." He nodded slowly. "You're the real thing. I respect that. So I'm going to talk to you straight, the way I'd want to be talked to." "Then talk," Caleb said. "Walk away." Voss said it simply. "This isn't your fight. This is a rich family's mess about a rich family's money, and you and your daughter are standing right in the middle of the blast radius, and you don't belong there. I can make it worth your while. Very worth your while. A number that means you never worry about that girl's future again, college house, whatever she needs for the rest of her life. All you have to do is take your daughter and go home and let these people sort out their money the way rich people always do. Quietly." He held Caleb's eyes. "I'm not threatening you, son. I want to be clear about that. This is the generous option. This is me, one soldier to another, offering you a soft way out of something that's going to get very hard." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "You've got kids, Voss?" he asked. The older man's jaw tightened just slightly. "A daughter. Grown now. Then let me ask you something. One father to another." Caleb's voice was low and even, and there was steel running all the way through it. 12 years ago, a man I'd never met climbed down a cliff in a storm and pulled 5 people out of a wrecked car, and then he grabbed me and threw me clear of a collapse and used the last ground under his own feet to do it. He died so I'd live. And because he died, I got to keep going. I got to marry my Emily. I got to have my Avery. He took a step closer. That man had no idea who I was. I was nobody to him, just a stranger in the rain, and he gave me his whole life anyway without a second's hesitation, and he smiled doing it. He let that sit. Now you're standing here offering me money, your generous money, to walk away, and let the men who forged that man's death and stole from his memory keep on winning. To take a check and let his father bury him a second time. Caleb shook his head slowly. "You picked the wrong soldier, Voss, because I already got the most generous offer any man will ever get in his life 12 years ago in the rain from a stranger who asked for nothing, and I've spent every day since trying to be worth it. You think I'm going to sell that? You think there's a number?" Voss said nothing. "There's no number," Caleb said quietly. "Go tell Charles there's no number. And tell him one more thing from me, soldier to soldier, since he sent a soldier to do this." He reached up and drew the silver anchor out from under his collar and held it up so it caught the last of the dusk light. "Tell him I've been wearing his son's necklace for 12 years, and I'll be wearing it when this is over, and there is not enough money in the Ashford fortune to make me take it off. This isn't about his money. It was never about the money. It's about a good man's name, and I'm going to make sure the whole world knows it before I'm done." For a long moment, Harlan Voss looked at the anchor, and then at Caleb, and something moved in the old man's hard face, something Caleb almost recognized, because he'd seen it in the mirror. The look of a man who has spent a long time doing a job he's stopped being proud of. "I served with men like the one you're describing," Voss said finally, very quietly. "Long time ago. The kind who'd trade their life for yours without thinking. There aren't many of them." He looked at the anchor one more time. "There aren't many of you either, apparently." And then he turned, and he got into his unremarkable car, and he drove back through the gate and into the gathering dark. But he drove slowly, and Caleb stood watching the taillights go, holding the necklace in his fist, and had the strange, strong feeling that something had shifted in the old soldier that Charles Ashford had not accounted for and would not like. He went back inside. Victoria met him in the hall, having watched the whole thing on the security feed, and she didn't say anything at all. She just crossed the distance between them and put her arms around him and held on, and Caleb held her back. The two of them standing in the hallway, lined with photographs of a dead man who had, in his way, brought them both to exactly this moment. "He offered you money to leave," Victoria said into his chest. "He did." "A lot of money." "A lot," Caleb agreed. She pulled back to look at him. "And you said no. To take care of Avery's whole future college, everything you said no." Victoria. Caleb took her face in his hands the way, though he didn't know it, though he could never have known it the way a man had once taken her face in his hands before every hard thing they ever faced together. "Some things you don't sell. Not for any price. Not for your daughter's college, not for your own peace, not for anything. Because if you sell those things, then the money buys you a life that isn't worth living, and your kid grows up watching a father who folded when it counted." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "I'd rather raise Avery poor and proud than rich and bought, and so would you. It's why I—" He stopped, and something flickered across his face, and he pushed on anyway, quiet. "It's part of why I feel about you the way I've been trying not to feel for 3 weeks." Victoria's breath caught. "You said the storm hadn't passed," she whispered. "It hasn't. Not all the way." His forehead came down against hers again. "But I just told a man there's no price on my soul, and it seemed like the wrong moment to keep lying to you about mine. So—" He breathed out. "There. That's as far as I'll go tonight. Rest of it waits for the good day. But I wanted you to know it's coming. I wanted you to know it's real." 2 days later at 7 in the morning, Victoria's phone rang. It was not Charles. It was Harlan Voss. "Mrs. Ashford," the old soldier said, and his voice was strange heavy, like a man setting down a weight he'd carried too long. "I've been Charles Ashford's man for 30 years. I've done things for that family I'm not proud of. Sealing that report was one of them, and it's sat wrong with me every day since, and I told myself for 10 years it was just a job." A long pause. "Your commander showed me something at the gate the other night, a necklace, and it reminded me of some men I served with a long time ago, better men than the one I've been working for." Another pause longer. "I have the original report, Mrs. Ashford, the real one. I kept a copy, I always keep a copy, it's what's kept me alive in this business. And I have documentation of the seal order with Charles's signature on it. And I'm prepared to hand all of it to you and to your journalist, and to a federal prosecutor if it comes to that." His voice dropped. "That soldier was right. There's no number. There shouldn't have been a number 10 years ago, and I let there be one, and I've got a daughter too, and I'd like to be able to look her in the eye. So, tell Commander Dawson the anchor held on my end too. Late, but it held." Gay. Victoria hung up the phone with tears streaming down her face, and she looked at Caleb, who had heard every word. "We have it," she said. "Caleb, we have all of it. The report, the seal order, Charles's signature." Voss turned. "You're what you said to him at the gate." It turned him. She was laughing and crying at once. "We have everything. The storm's passing. It's almost over. We're going to give Nathaniel back the truth." And Caleb Dawson pulled her into his arms in the hallway of photographs and held her while she wept the last of 10 years of grief out against his chest and over her shoulder. The silver anchor caught the morning light, the necklace that a dying man had once passed to a stranger, that a stranger had carried for 12 years, that had crossed a ballroom and cracked open a decade-old lie and turned even the man hired to protect it. Still holding, still steady, still refusing against all odds to let anyone it loved be torn loose and lost. Charles Ashford chose the second door. He didn't choose it out of conscience. Victoria knew better than to believe that, and Caleb never believed it for a second. He chose it because once Harlan Voss turned over the original report and the seal order with his signature on it, the first door led to a federal courtroom, and no amount of granite in a man's spine holds up against his own signature on a document ordering the concealment of a military record. Charles Ashford was 81 years old, and he did not intend to spend whatever years he had left being fitted for the kind of headline his daughter-in-law had promised him. So he chose the door that let him keep some scrap of the name he'd spent a lifetime building. He came to the house to sign the statement. Victoria had insisted on that, not a lawyer's office, not a neutral conference room, but the house she had built with Nathaniel in the study, where she'd finally read the papers he'd hoped she never would. She wanted him to sign the truth about his son under the same roof where she'd uncovered the lie. He arrived looking smaller than Caleb had expected. In Victoria's stories, Charles Ashford had been a titan, a granite tower of a man who'd terrified an entire family for half a century. The man who walked into the study leaning on a cane was just old and tired and beaten, and carrying underneath all of it something Victoria had never once seen on his face in 20 years of marriage into his family. Shame. "Where do I sign?" he said. No preamble, no performance. The concerned father voice was gone, and the granite voice was gone, and what was left was just a very old man in the last light of his life. Victoria's lawyer laid out the statement. Charles read it, the true account of Nathaniel's death, the acknowledgement of the sealed report, the correction of the record, the return of the money into a foundation bearing his son's name. He read every word. And when he came to the end, he picked up the pen, and then he stopped, and for a long moment he didn't sign anything at all. "He was ashamed of me," Charles said suddenly. He wasn't looking at Victoria. He was looking at the photograph on the desk, the sailboat, the sunburn, the laughing man. "Nathaniel, my whole life I thought I was ashamed of him. Ashamed that my son wanted to be good instead of rich. Ashamed he walked away from everything I built. Ashamed he married a girl with no name and no money, and started over from nothing." His voice was very quiet. "And it took me until this exact moment at 81 years old, with a pen in my hand, to understand that I had it backwards the entire time. He was never the disappointment. I was." He looked up at Victoria, and his eyes were wet, and it was the most human she had ever seen him. He died the way he lived, giving everything to strangers and asking for nothing. And I took that. I took the truest, best thing he ever did, and I hid it in a drawer to protect a payout I didn't even need. I have more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes, Victoria, and I stole from my own dead son to get a little more." His hand was trembling on the pen. "What kind of a man does that? What kind of a father?" "The kind who can still sign that paper," Victoria said quietly. 10 years too late, but not too late for it to mean something." Charles Ashford signed his name, and then he set the pen down and he looked at Caleb Dawson. For the first time, really looked at him, the Navy commander in his repaired uniform, standing quiet by the window with the silver anchor at his throat. "You're the one he saved," Charles said. "Yes, sir." "You've worn his necklace 12 years." "Yes, sir." The old man studied him for a long moment. "Voss told me what you said at the gate, about there being no number." A pause. "Do you know in 81 years you're one of maybe 3 men I've ever met that I couldn't buy? My son was another one." Something moved in his ruined old face. "He'd have liked you. God help me, he'd have liked you a great deal. He always did prefer the people who couldn't be bought, said they were the only ones worth knowing." He picked up his cane and rose slowly to his feet. "Take care of her, Commander. And that little girl of yours, the one my people put in the papers. The word came hard, like it had rusted from disuse. "I'm sorry for that. Tell her an old man is sorry." He walked to the door, and then he stopped, one hand on the frame, and without turning around, he said in a voice so low they almost missed it, "Thank you for carrying him, when none of us would." And then Charles Ashford was gone, and the lie he'd guarded for a decade went with him, and the truth about Nathaniel Ashford was finally, at last, free. The story ran, but not the way Victoria had first threatened. She didn't need the scandal anymore. With Charles's signed statement, and Voss's documents, and the corrected record, the story didn't have to be about a villain, it got to be about a hero instead. The investigative journalist wrote it that way, and it was better for it, and it spread across the country in a week. The billionaire's husband, who died a nameless hero. The Navy officer who wore his necklace for 12 years. The family up the coast, who named their baby after an angel with no name. And the widow who finally read the papers and gave her husband back the death he actually died. The Reyes family drove down for the day the record was formally corrected. All 6 of them, Miguel and Sofia and Lucia. 17, now tall and grave and beautiful, who had said being brave means scared, but doing it anyway to herself on every hard day for 12 years, without knowing where it came from. And the two boys. And little Angel, 11 years old, named for a man with no name, who walked up to Caleb Dawson and stared at the silver anchor and said, "Is that really from the man, the angel? The one I'm named for?" And Caleb crouched down, the way he crouched down for Avery, and lifted the necklace over his own head and held it out so the boy could see it up close and said, "His name was Nathaniel, and yeah, this was his. He wore it the night he saved your brother and sister, the night your mom and dad got to keep their whole family." He let the boy hold it careful in both small hands. "You were named for a real man angel, the realest one I ever knew, and you should be proud of that name every single day of your life." Sophia Reyes could not stop weeping. She held on to Victoria, and the two women stood in the memorial garden and wept together, the widow and the mother connected forever by one man's, one decision in one storm. And Miguel shook Caleb's hand and could not let go of it, and said over and over, "Thank you, thank you. He saved my babies. Thank you for finding us. Thank you for his name." And Lucia Reyes, 17 years old, walked over to the stone where Nathaniel's name was carved, the stone that had borne a lie for 10 years, and now at last bore the truth. And she knelt down in front of it, and she said something to it that nobody else could hear. And then she pressed her hand flat against the carved letters of his name, and stayed like that for a long, long time. She was the 5-year-old he'd handed up out of the storm. And she had grown up brave, scared but doing it anyway every day of her life because of 30 seconds with a stranger in the rain who never lived to know she'd made it. The Anchor Hope Foundation launched that autumn, funded by every dollar the Ashfords had stolen, plus a great deal more that Victoria put in herself. It existed for military widows, for single parents raising children alone, for families rebuilding after the kind of loss that takes the ground out from under your feet with no warning at all. Victoria ran it, threw herself into it with the same ferocity she'd once thrown into building an empire, except this time it filled the hole instead of hiding it. And she asked Caleb to lead it with her, begged him nearly, and Caleb said no. "I'm not a leader of foundations," he told her that evening in the garden when the launch was over and the guests were gone and it was finally just the two of them. "I'm a teacher. That's what I'm good for. Let me do the part I'm good for." "Which part is that?" "The part where I sit down with a father who just lost his wife and can't get out of bed in the morning and I tell him I've been there. I know exactly how deep that hole is because I was at the bottom of it for a year with a baby on my chest." He looked out over the garden. "I don't want to run anything, Victoria. I don't want a title or a corner office. I want to be the guy who tells the broken parents that broken doesn't mean finished. That you can be at the absolute bottom, sure you'll never stand up again, and still get up the next morning, and pack a lunch, and get your kid to school, and do it again and again, until one day you look up and years have passed, and your kid is happy, and you didn't die after all." His voice was rough. "That's the thing I've got to give. That's the only thing I've really got. Let me give that." And Victoria understood, and she let him give exactly that. And he was extraordinary at it. Grieving parents who wouldn't listen to a therapist or a pastor or a well-meaning friend would listen to Caleb Dawson because Caleb Dawson had been where they were and had the scars to prove he'd climbed out. And when he told them it got better, they believed him because he wasn't reading it off a card. He'd lived every word. The storm passed. And on a good day, a calm, ordinary, sunlit day months after Charles signed the paper, when there was no war left to fight, and nothing between them but the two of them, Caleb finally said the rest of it. They were in the garden. Avery was down at the far end, older now, chasing something with the Reyes boys who'd come to visit again, her laughter carrying up across the grass. And Caleb took Victoria's face in his hands the way he had in the hallway, the way a dead man had once done before every hard thing. And he said, "The storm's passed." "It has," Victoria whispered. "I told you I'd hold the thought until a good day. This is a good day. This is the best day I've had in 6 years." His thumbs brushed her cheeks. "I've loved you since about the 3rd week, and I've been terrified of it the whole time because the last woman I loved I lost on a highway with no warning, and I swore I'd never open that door again. It's the most dangerous thing in the world, loving somebody. There's no armor for it. There's no walking away from it clean." He breathed out. But I've spent 12 years wearing a necklace that reminds me a man once thought my life was worth trading his own for. And a man who somebody died to save doesn't get to spend the rest of that life too scared to live it." He held her eyes. "So, I love you, Victoria. I've been trying not to say it for months, and I'm done trying. I love you, and I want to build whatever's left of both our lives together, and I'm not scared of it anymore. Not today." And Victoria Ashford, who had been sure 10 years ago that love had died with her husband in a storm off the coast, who had built an empire out of the frozen place where her heart used to be, who had learned to make her face do her feeling for her, so no one would ever see how much she'd lost. Victoria Ashford put her hands over Caleb's hands and let the tears come, and did not try to stop them or hide them or make her face do anything at all. "I love you too," she said. "I have loved you since you stood in that room and told me my husband was smiling. Since you gave me back the last 30 seconds of his life that no amount of money could ever have bought. You gave me the thing I wanted most in the world and couldn't have, and you didn't even know you were doing it, and you asked for nothing." She laughed through the tears. "Nathaniel would have loved you. He'd have loved you so much it's almost unfair. He sent you to me. I believe that now. I didn't used to believe in anything like that, but I believe it now. He couldn't come home to me, so he sent the man he saved instead. He sent you and your little girl to fill a house that had been empty for 10 years. She reached up and touched the silver anchor at his throat. "He sent you home wearing his necklace so I'd know." They were married the following spring in the memorial garden under the trees, with Nathaniel's corrected stone standing quiet witness, and the Reyes family in the front row, and Avery 9, now gap-toothed and radiant, carrying the rings. It was small. It was not a billionaire's wedding, not really. It was just family. It was just the people that one man's courage in one storm had woven together across a decade and 200 miles of coastline. And when the officiant asked if anyone objected, a breeze moved through the trees, and Victoria smiled through her tears, because she knew the way you know things you can't prove, that the only man who might have had a claim was giving them his blessing. Caleb never took the necklace off. Not at the wedding, not after. It stayed at his throat through the years that followed, warm from his skin, the little silver anchor with the scratch on its lower edge worn now by a man who'd earned the right to wear it 3 times over. And it became, in time, exactly what Victoria's foundation needed it to become. Not hidden away in a billionaire's private collection the way it might have been if she'd taken it back that first night in the ballroom. Not locked in a case as a relic, but cast in bronze larger at the entrance to every Anchor Hope Center that opened across the country, a silver anchor, and beneath it carved in stone the words Nathaniel had lived and died by. Being brave means scared, but doing it anyway. Thousands of children came through those doors over the years. Thousands of grieving parents. Military widows who'd been handed a folded flag and a hole in their lives where a whole future used to be. Single fathers at the bottom of the exact hole Caleb had once been at the bottom of. And every one of them passed under that anchor and heard the story. The story of a man who climbed down a cliff in a storm, because it never occurred to him not to. And the stranger who carried his memory for 12 years. And the widow who read the papers at last, and the truth that could be buried but never ever destroyed. Avery Dawson grew up in that story. Grew up knowing that her father's greatest strength had never been the uniform or the deployments or the medals he didn't talk about. It was the necklace. It was what the necklace meant. It was a man's refusal across 12 years and 4 deployments, and the worst night of his life, to let go of the truth that his life had been worth saving, and therefore had to be worth living. She grew up knowing that being broken and being finished are 2 different things, because her father had told her so 1,000 times, and because she'd watched a whole house full of grief turn slowly over years back into a home. And on the last night of the story, years later, an ordinary evening, the sun going down gold over the memorial garden. Avery, grown now herself, stood beside her father at Nathaniel's stone, the way she had 100 times. And she reached out and touched the anchor at his chest, the way she'd touched it since she was 7 years old. "Dad," she said, "do you ever think about how strange it is that you're only here because a man you never met climbed down a cliff? And I'm only here because of that. And every single person who ever walked through those center doors, They got help because of 30 seconds one stranger spent in a storm 12 years before any of them ever needed it. And Caleb Dawson, older now, gray at the temples, the silver anchor still at his throat, looked out over the garden where a good man's name was carved in the truth at last. And he put his arm around his daughter, and he said, the thing he had come over all the long years to believe with his whole heart, a single act of courage can travel farther than anyone will ever know. Your namesake up the coast. Angel Reyes. He's a grown man now, and there are people alive today because of things he's done, and he only exists because Nathaniel came down that cliff. It never stops, sweetheart. Kindness like that never stops moving. It just keeps going and going further than the man who started it could ever have dreamed long after he's gone. He held her close. That's what your old man learned. The people we lose don't ever really leave us. Sometimes they send someone else, a stranger in a storm, a necklace, a whole life you never saw coming, to remind us that love is still here, that it was always here, that it never left at all. And the sun set over the garden, and the anchor caught the last of the light and shone, and a father and his grown daughter stood together in the warmth of it. Living proof, both of them, that one man's single choice in one storm had held and would go on holding long after everyone who remembered the storm was gone. Because some anchors never let go, and some people we lose never truly leave.